The dust was thick that Saturday afternoon in 1931, covering everything like a shroud over the small town of Robinsonville, Mississippi. The sun hung low and angry in the sky, turning the horizon into liquid copper. At the edge of town, near the junction where three dirt roads met like fingers reaching into nowhere, a figure appeared, walking slow, deliberate, hat pulled low over his eyes, and in his hands a guitar that seemed to catch the light in a way that made people look twice. Some folks who saw him that day swear the shadows around him moved different, stretched longer than they should. Robert Johnson had come back, and nothing would ever be the same. 6 months, that's how long he'd been gone. 6 months since the young man with clumsy fingers and a voice that cracked more than it carried had disappeared from the juke joints and street corners of the Delta. 6 months since they'd laughed him off stage, told him to come back when he learned to play. 6 months since he'd walked away into the night with his head down and his guitar on his back, humiliation burning in his chest like swallowed fire. But the man walking down that road now, he didn't look like someone who'd been laughed at. He looked like someone who'd been somewhere else, somewhere far. The first person to see him was an old woman sitting on her porch, shelling peas into a tin bowl. She looked up at the sound of footsteps and froze. Later, she'd tell anyone who'd listen that she knew. Right then, in that moment, she knew something had changed. The way he carried himself, the way the air seemed to hum around him. She watched him pass, and when he tipped his hat to her, she saw his eyes, dark and deep and holding something she couldn't name. Something that made her grip her Bible a little tighter that night. Word travels fast in small towns. By sundown, everyone knew Robert Johnson was back. And by the time the moon rose full and bright over the Delta, casting silver light across the cotton fields, folks had gathered at the local juke joint, a weathered building that leaned slightly to one side, with kerosene lamps flickering in the windows, and the smell of whiskey and tobacco smoke drifting out into the warm night air. Inside, the air was thick with anticipation, voices low, eyes watching the door, waiting. When Robert walked in, the room didn't go silent exactly, but something shifted, a ripple of awareness that moved through the crowd like wind through tall grass. He didn't say much, just nodded to a few people, took off his hat, and moved toward the corner where an empty chair waited under a bare bulb, swinging gently from the ceiling. He sat down slow, almost ceremonial, and pulled his guitar across his lap. The instrument looked different somehow, worn in new places. The wood darker, or maybe it was just the light. He ran his fingers across the strings, not playing yet, just feeling. And in that moment, with everyone watching and the night pressing close against the windows, someone coughed nervously. Someone else shifted their weight. The floorboards creaked. Then he began to play. The first notes came out like water from a deep well, pure and cold and impossibly clear. Not the fumbling chords they remembered, not the uncertain rhythm that used to make people wince. This was something else entirely. His fingers moved across the fretboard with a precision that seemed almost inhuman, finding notes that shouldn't exist in the spaces between notes, creating harmonies that made the hair stand up on the back of your neck. And his voice, God, his voice. It had dropped lower, gained texture, became an instrument unto itself, raw and smooth at the same time, haunted and haunting. He played a song they'd never heard before, something about a hellhound on his trail, about roads that led nowhere and everywhere, about crossroads and choices and the price of desire. The lyrics painted pictures in the smoky air. You could see them if you closed your eyes. Midnight highways, empty fields, a figure standing where four directions met, offering something that glittered like gold, but felt like ice. The music swirled and dove and climbed, taking unexpected turns, breaking rules that hadn't even been written yet. Blues, yes, but blues from some other dimension. Blues that knew secrets the Delta hadn't taught. One by one, the musicians in the room stopped talking, stopped drinking, just stood there with their mouths open, trying to understand what they were hearing. Sunhouse, already a master of the Delta blues, stood near the wall with his arms crossed, his face a mask of confusion and something close to fear. Willie Brown, who'd played with Robert before, who'd been there when they'd laughed him away, shook his head slowly, as if trying to wake from a dream. Later, he'd say it was like watching someone who'd been blind suddenly see, or someone who'd been dead suddenly breathe. But it wasn't just technical skill. Any fool could practice and get better. This was something deeper, something in the way Robert swayed as he played, like he was in conversation with forces no one else could see, something in the way his eyes closed and his face contorted. Not in concentration, but in memory, like he was playing something he'd heard echoing from far away, from somewhere dark. The notes seemed to come from the earth itself, rising up through the floorboards, through the soles of his feet, through his body and out through his fingers. Ancient and new at the same time. Between songs, the room stayed quiet, reverent. Someone brought him a drink and he took it without looking, without stopping. Just a quick sip and back to the guitar, like he couldn't bear to be separated from it for too long, like it might disappear if he let go. He played for hours, song after song after song, each one different, but all carrying that same otherworldly quality, that same sense of having come from somewhere beyond. Some people stayed the whole night, transfixed. Others left early, unable to shake the feeling that they were witnessing something they shouldn't, something dangerous. Before we go deeper into what happened that night and into the mystery that still haunts the Delta to this day, subscribe to Soul Chronicles and turn on notifications, because every story here carries the weight of souls who touched the impossible. Leave a comment telling me which legend of the blues you want me to uncover next, because in this channel, every shadow has a song and every song has a secret. The question everyone asked, of course, was simple. How? How does a mediocre guitar player disappear for 6 months and come back playing like the reincarnation of all the blues masters combined? How does someone go from being laughed off stage to creating music that would define a genre, influence generations, and become the foundation of rock and roll itself? The answer, depending on who you asked, ranged from the practical to the impossible. Some said he'd gone to study with a master, that he'd found some old bluesman living deep in the backwoods, someone who knew the old ways, the real ways, and had learned everything in an intense period of isolation and practice. That made sense to some folks. Plausible, reasonable, but others who knew Robert, who'd seen him before, said no amount of teaching could account for what they witnessed. This wasn't just improvement, this was transformation. Others whispered about the crossroads, about the old legend that had circulated through the Delta for generations, passed down from ancestors who'd brought it across the ocean from Africa, mixed it with Christianity and folk magic and desperation. The legend said that if you wanted something badly enough, if you were willing to pay the price, you could go to where 2 roads crossed at midnight. And if you were brave enough or foolish enough, you could make a deal. The devil himself or one of his servants would appear, and for the price of your immortal soul, he'd give you whatever you desired: talent, fame, power, the ability to play guitar like no human being had ever played before. The legend seemed ridiculous in daylight, superstitious nonsense from simpler times. But at night, in the Delta, where the darkness pressed close and the air hung thick with humidity and history, where the weight of slavery and suffering and survival created its own kind of spiritual gravity, the legend felt different. It felt possible. And Robert Johnson, with his sudden and inexplicable mastery, with his haunted eyes and his songs about hellhounds and crossroads and running from something that couldn't be outrun, seemed like living proof. There was a man who claimed to have seen it, a field worker named Willie Spencer, who swore on his mother's grave that he'd been walking home late one night about 6 months back, cutting through the fields to save time. He'd seen a figure standing at the crossroads near Highway 61 and Highway 49, just standing there in the moonlight with a guitar. And then, Spencer said, another figure appeared, taller, wearing dark clothes that seemed to absorb the light. The two figures stood facing each other for a long time, too far away to hear words, but Spencer said he felt something, a pressure in the air, a charge like before a thunderstorm. And then the tall figure reached out and took the guitar from Robert's hands, did something to it, tuned it maybe, or something else, something Spencer couldn't see. And when the guitar was handed back, Robert played a single note, just one. And Spencer said it cut through the night like a scream, pure and terrible and beautiful. He ran, didn't stop until he reached home, didn't tell anyone for weeks because who would believe him? But whether you believed in crossroads deals or not, whether you thought Robert had studied with a master or made a pact with darkness, one thing was undeniable. The man who came back was not the same man who'd left, and the music he brought with him would echo through time in ways no one could have imagined. Dr. Richard Collins, a musicologist who spent years studying the Delta blues tradition, once said in an interview that Robert Johnson's playing represented a quantum leap in the evolution of the blues, not an incremental improvement, but a fundamental shift in what was possible with 6 strings and a human voice. Collins noted that Johnson's technique incorporated elements that wouldn't become standard until decades later. His use of the bass strings as a separate rhythmic element while playing melody on the treble strings, essentially making the guitar sound like 2 instruments at once. His walking bass lines that would become foundational to rock and roll. His unique tunings that created harmonic possibilities other players hadn't explored. And all of this, Collins emphasized, appearing fully formed in a man who 6 months earlier had been barely competent. In the weeks and months that followed that first night, Robert Johnson became a legend. He traveled throughout the Delta and beyond, playing juke joints and street corners, and anywhere people would listen. His reputation grew, stories about him multiplied. Some said he could play any song after hearing it once. Others claimed he could make women cry just by the way he bent a note. There were tales of him playing all night, every night, like sleep was something he'd given up, like rest was a luxury he could no longer afford. And there were darker stories too, about the sadness that hung around him like cologne, about the way he'd sometimes stop mid-song and look over his shoulder as if something was following him, about the times he'd finish playing and sit there in silence, staring at his hands like they belonged to someone else. Son House, who played with Robert after his return, later recalled that there was something tragic about him. Even in his triumph, even with the undeniable genius pouring out of him, there was a sense of something lost. Something given away that couldn't be retrieved. House said Robert talked sometimes about the price of things, about how nothing was free, about how every gift came with a weight attached. And late at night, after everyone else had gone home, House claimed he heard Robert playing alone in the dark. And the music sounded like mourning, like someone singing at their own funeral. The question burns in the mind like a coal that won't cool. Would you do it? If you had the chance, if you stood at that crossroads with your mediocrity heavy on your shoulders and your dreams burning in your chest, if someone offered you everything you ever wanted in exchange for something you couldn't see or touch or fully understand, would you say yes? Would you trade eternity for a moment of perfection? Would you give up your soul to become immortal in a different way? Robert Johnson played his last show in 1938 in a juke joint in Three Forks, Mississippi. He was only 27 years old. The official story is that he was poisoned, whiskey laced with strychnine by a jealous husband. He died in agony, crawling on his hands and knees, reportedly barking like a dog, foaming at the mouth. A horrible, undignified end for a man who'd created such transcendent beauty. But there were others who said it wasn't poison at all, that the debt had come due, that hellhounds, real or metaphorical, had finally caught up, that the crossroads, having given, had finally taken. In his brief career, Robert Johnson recorded only 29 songs. 29 songs that would change music forever. Songs that would be covered by everyone from Muddy Waters to Eric Clapton, from the Rolling Stones to Led Zeppelin. Songs that contained the DNA of rock and roll, hidden in 12-bar progressions and slide guitar riffs. Songs that captured something essential about human longing and fear and defiance. 29 songs recorded in hotel rooms in Texas, just Robert and a microphone and that guitar, creating sounds that still send chills down spines almost a century later. Listen to those recordings now, through the crackle and hiss of primitive recording equipment, through the decades and the distance, and you can still feel it. That otherness, that sense of someone channeling something beyond themselves. The way his voice cracks with emotion on certain lines. The way his guitar seems to respond to unspoken commands, bending and crying and shouting. The complexity hiding in what sounds simple. The darkness lurking beneath the blues. You can hear it all. And you can wonder, just like people wondered then, just like people will wonder forever, where it came from, how it was possible, what it cost. There's a cemetery in Mississippi where Robert Johnson is supposedly buried. I say supposedly because there are actually 3 different graves claimed as his, and no one knows for sure which one, if any, holds his remains. Even in death, he remains elusive, a mystery wrapped in legend, wrapped in music. People visit those graves, leave guitar picks and whiskey bottles, pay their respects to a man who burned brightly and briefly and left behind something that refuses to die. The grave markers are weathered now, the inscriptions fading, but the music endures, timeless and terrible and transcendent. The blues has always been about transformation, about taking suffering and turning it into art, about taking the worst life can throw at you and making it beautiful somehow, making it mean something. Robert Johnson embodied that transformation in ways both literal and figurative. He took his humiliation and his desire and his ambition and transformed it into genius. Whether through practice or pact, through study or supernatural intervention, he became something more than human. He became the blues personified, a living myth, a cautionary tale and an inspiration simultaneously. And perhaps that's the real story. Not what happened at the crossroads, if anything happened at all. Not the mechanics of how someone improves so dramatically so quickly, but rather the metaphor, the idea that greatness requires sacrifice, that to touch the divine in art or music or any form of creation, you have to give something up, part of yourself, your comfort, your safety, your soul, in a manner of speaking. You have to be willing to stand at the crossroads, literal or figurative, and make a choice. Stay safe and mediocre, or risk everything for the chance at something extraordinary. Robert Johnson chose. And the world is different because of it. Every time someone picks up a guitar and plays the blues, they're channeling a little of what Robert brought back from wherever he went. Every time a rock band plays a 12-bar progression, they're walking a path he cleared. Every time a singer bends a note with feeling, they're echoing his voice across time. He died young and in pain, but in a way, he never died at all. He's still there in the music, in the legend, in the mystery that refuses to be solved. The sun is rising now over the delta. Same fields, same roads, same crossroads where highways meet and possibilities multiply. The dust still hangs in the air, catching the early light. And if you stand there long enough, in the quiet before the world wakes up, you might hear it, faint, distant, the sound of a guitar being played with impossible skill. The sound of a voice singing about hellhounds and highways and the price of dreams. The sound of a man who went somewhere no one else could follow and came back carrying fire. Maybe the crossroads was real. Maybe it was metaphor. Maybe it was practice and determination and talent that was always there, just waiting to be unlocked. Maybe it was all of these things or none of them. Maybe the truth is less important than the mystery, because the mystery is what keeps us wondering, keeps us imagining, keeps us believing that transformation is possible, that greatness can emerge from nowhere, that the impossible can become real if you want it badly enough. Robert Johnson stood at a crossroads once, a long time ago, and the reverberations of that moment, real or imagined, still echo through every note of blues and rock and roll ever played. still challenge us to consider what we'd be willing to sacrifice for our art, our passion, our dreams. Still remind us that some questions don't have answers, and maybe that's exactly how it should be. If this story sent chills down your spine, hit that like button and subscribe to Soul Chronicles, because here, every soul has a song that demands to be told, and every mystery has a heartbeat that refuses to stop. Turn on notifications so you never miss a journey into the shadows where music and legend intertwine. And tell me in the comments, what do you believe? Crossroads deal or raw dedication? Because this is just one chapter in a book that was written in moonlight and signed in music. The day Robert Johnson returned, playing like no one had ever heard before, the Delta changed, music changed, and somewhere in the space between notes, in the silence between heartbeats, the mystery remains, waiting, watching, wondering if someone else will find their way to the crossroads, wondering what they'll be willing to pay, wondering what kind of music will be born from the darkness. That guitar is still playing somewhere. Can you hear it?